A warm welcome, and hello, and welcome to the d.velop webinar all about digital mail delivery. We'd like to bring you a little closer to it today, as an alternative to traditional letter sending by post. Because it can look like this. In digital form, everything is faster, simpler, more cost-effective, and, I believe, we'll also find out in the next few minutes, much safer. Why, and how, is that the case? You'll find that out in the next few minutes. I hope I've sparked a little bit of interest in what's coming up next. But before we get started, we've prepared a few ground rules, so that you know exactly what will happen in the next few minutes and, most importantly, what to do if you have any questions during the webinar. My name is Stefan Orskiewski. I'm pleased to be your moderator for the next few minutes. And we've taken the liberty of muting you for the duration of the webinar. That means you can't speak up verbally, but in writing. We reach point 2. You can ask questions anytime in the chat. We'll answer them at the end. You can ask them at any time through the chat window here in your webinar room. We'll collect them and simply answer them in writing at the end of the webinar. But don't worry, we've done this before and have common questions ready. These questions often recur. FAQs will be answered soon in the webinar, and similar questions keep coming up time and again. That means the FAQs will also be answered for you during the webinar shortly. And last but not least, the hint at the end. Afterwards, you will receive not only the presentation via email, i.e. all the slides that you will see here, but also the video recording of this webinar, so you can take your time to go over it all again. So hopefully, there won't be any questions left unanswered. So, that's pretty much it for the ground rules. And now I'm pleased to hand over to the one who knows a lot better all about digital mail delivery. And this is my colleague, Michael Gelling, Senior Pre-Sales Manager, here at d.velop. And if you want to ask someone what the alternative to sending information or documents by post might look like, and no matter what industry it is, he's the man for the job, and that's why I'm now handing over to you, dear Michael.
Yes, thank you very much, Stefan. A warm welcome from my side to today's webinar. I'd like to dive into the topic now in the next few minutes. For example, how digital delivery can be an alternative to traditional shipping. And I want to start off, of course. First of all, to get an overview, why is it perhaps especially important right now to create a digital solution or find another way? If you look at this graphic now, you can see very clearly, like from or like off. From 2003 to 2024, postage is being regularly increased. This naturally leads to the normal letter being sent becoming significantly more expensive. And of course, that means I have more effort involved. If you take a look at this, we have an increase of over 50%. In the meantime, in addition to that, we obviously need to consider another point. The volume of mail being sent, which is today, is sent via Deutsche Post, is decreasing increasingly. This also means that not only is there a decline in letters being sent, that it's getting more and more expensive, but also that letters might not be delivered as quickly anymore, as one originally hopes it has. Because from one day to the next, you're now out of the loop, so that you obviously have more time to deliver this letter. If you look at the numbers here, it's actually quite impressive, because from 2016 to 2022, the number of letters that were still sent in analog form has decreased by 34%. And of course, you have to take a look at that. There are many alternatives today that might be possible. And that's obviously important. How to best organize that for oneself in the company. Very important, emails are not a secure alternative for sending business letters. Why? Well, many factors. It's been represented quite well. There are just so many points that come into play. I think it's really important here. Phishing attacks, which I believe no one can claim to be free from. That means documents that are transmitted are altered during transmission and transfer. So the person receiving this document can't necessarily assume that, or can see it. That something has changed here. Has changed and then maybe transfers an invoice to the wrong bank account. It's a big problem. It's similar with malware attachments, for example. It gets opened accidentally. It installs itself, encryption takes place and similar things. Those are obviously just two problems. There are many, many more problems included here, which of course you'd want to look into. How do I want to send my letters, which I might have in digital form today? How do I want to send them in the future? And of course, securely. Both for the sender, that is, for us as a company, but also for the recipient. Of course, there's the alternative, the d.velop postbox. And here I'd like to go into detail about that now. How we manage this process, the rules, and what defines us. If we take a look at the organization, it's the case today that we create the documents normally within our organization. The documents are printed. It's really important they are sorted. It may well be that more letters or documents come in, then they are put into envelopes and finally sent out. Then it's like this. The recipient gets the document and then has to archive and digitize it. Because maybe my business partner also needs to keep these documents in some digital form. I have to file it away. I have to archive it. I have to. And you can already see, there are many little manual steps involved that I have to take. I might have to do that every day, because every day, I have outgoing mail that I want to send, and my counterpart has exactly the same situation. I receive the documents, I might pick them up, or I get them delivered. I have to archive them, I have to scan them, I have to somehow digitize them. And these are, of course, processes where we try to support you. You can actually see that quite well on the second slide. The documents are created, still with you, and are sent to the d.velop postbox, where you can then add attachments, for example. You can then send the documents. It's really important for you, nothing actually changes, because we are now starting from where the documents are currently printed for you. And with that, you have a fully automated process, which naturally leads to a corresponding reduction in workload. The digital process is, of course, also beneficial for the recipient. Here you can see the path is digital and the recipient already receives it in their postbox, delivered, and can then access their documents. The nice thing is, it gets automatically categorized. It gets archived. I use d.velop. I can leave it in the postbox, and of course, I can access it at any time as a recipient, which is, of course, very, very important for me. No matter where I am, I can access these documents and have a look at them, forward or similar, depending on what I want to do with it. It's really important now, of course. When you think about it, I've got a lot of business papers that need to be sent out. These could be invoices, these could be contracts, or a few other documents. And of course, it's the case that maybe not everyone wants the digital process. What's important in the end is when you see this down here, the little letter. We can also continue to start the analog process for them, perhaps for the recipients who don't want to use it in digital form today. That's always very important. But if you take a look at the process a bit further up, it's quite clear. The documents are still being generated for them. The data delivery can, of course, be done via a print stream, where we integrate our virtual printer. But it can also be a PDF file, which is already available today, or, for example, via XML or various other formats. In my live segment, I'll show you that again shortly. For example, how it can be sent out as a mail merge. Very important, the hybrid mail delivery is set up like this for us, that our system automatically recognizes this, who wants it digitally and who might not want it digitally. And you won't have any administrative hassle with it. This is a bit of theory about how the process is changing and what options you have there. But of course, it's really important to ask, what do I actually need this for and why? It's important to note that I can transmit any business correspondence and other letters in digital form. It's really important, especially when it comes to highly sensitive and confidential documents. That always includes everything that points to certain characteristics. The classic examples are, of course, any kind of medical reports or similar, but it can also be other sensitive documents, for instance, reports for illnesses or similar. But these can also be other sensitive documents, for example, It's really important. Often you want to have a proof of delivery for exactly those documents that are sensitive and need protection. You also need a proof of delivery. So, every document that has been successfully delivered is also acknowledged with a tracking ID, so that you have secure proof the document has also reached the appropriate recipient. Let's take a look at the industries, or rather the areas, that are all possible. This is just a selection. You can obviously add to that as much as you like. If you look at the top left, Union Resources is actually a classic example of application. So, it's like this. We obviously have HR documents that need to be sent out. These are payslips, pay tax, timesheets, and similar. They are very sensitive, and that's, for example, a use case for that. But not just that, the health insurance companies down in the bottom right. That's obviously another example of that, which contains very sensitive data, where, for example, insurance documents are communicated with the insured. It's being sent out and similar things. But the properties that we find quite centrally here also have a lot of important, sensitive data. For example, the service charge statement, which can be delivered digitally. Or, of course, information for my insured person. For example, a meter is being replaced. That something needs to be repaired somewhere. And. There are countless possibilities that can also come into play there. Those are just 3 examples. But you can also see it in the finance sector, with cooperatives, or of course in the legal field. Sales, purchasing. There are also loads of documents there that arise today that need to be sent digitally and where, ideally, I get a delivery receipt for it. So that I obviously have the security the document has reached the appropriate recipient. So we then moved on and simply defined some sectors. Who, for example, already trust in a d.velop postbox today, or might want to trust in it in the future. And you can clearly see that there are administrations, of course logistics, where a lot is happening, but also the healthcare sector, construction industry. And this list is certainly not exhaustive. There's still so much more that can be included here. Because if you dig a bit deeper, in almost every company, a kind of communication takes place, where documents are created that, for example, need to be sent to a third party. And that's exactly where the d.velop postbox comes into play. What that could look like. I'd like to show you that now in the live part. To do that, I'll step away from my presentation and would start with start the service charge statement. And this service charge statement is actually just like it normally comes about. I've got it here now. You can see it quite nicely down here. A total of 8 pages. And as I scroll through here, I have a large print file with different recipients, just like your documents come out of the systems today. Now I'd like to send this file. To do that, I'll go to Print. Do I then have the option to select my printer? Here I have my d.velop, the postal printer, that I want to access, and I'm sending the print job. That's the first step. And with that, I have exactly what I just showed in the process. The documents are created by them. And I'm no longer printing this data physically, but rather through the virtual printer as an interface to be able to process the data further. In the second step, we have what's called an output manager. For simplicity's sake, I've already entered my login details here, and now I'm going to log in. And here you can see quite nicely, for example, I have up here a print. That's the 6149. A print up here. That's the 6149. I have a digital and a postal mail. Here you can also see the hybrid process that's set up here. I have the user who printed it. I have the document type here. That's a service charge statement. The system recognized that on its own. And very importantly, out of the 8 pages, there are a total of 8 catches included. Now I'm going to mark the print job. I'll mark that one, and go to the details. Show. And now I'm in the details, who actually gets a corresponding service charge statement. And here I can see quite nicely the bottom 3, Michael Gelling, a sample from me, and flat 5. They've already activated their account and would now receive it in digital form. I can now go back into Michael Gelling's details, for example. I can also right-click here to display the documents, and I can check the document one last time. That looks good so far. If that's all right with me, I can actually go ahead and approve it straight away. Now, of course, it's a bit different when you're sending documents. I'm thinking, for example, about contracts. It often happens that attachments need to be sent along with them, which are indifferent to everyone. These are, for example, terms and conditions or other documents. Then I have the option up here, about attachments, for example, to select this attachment. Here, of course, I haven't saved anything. I could select it now, and everyone who is included in this print job would automatically receive this attachment. So, with these unpersonalized documents, as they like to call them, would automatically receive this attachment, so that with these unpersonalized documents, as they like to say, that can be sent with attachments and then also sent. It's then quick and easy with the push of a button, just as it should be, of course. Once I've checked that and I say I'd like to approve it now, I can go back to the top left, and then I'll start the approval process. I need to confirm that again, so I don't accidentally approve something that I might not want to approve just yet. And with the confirmation, the actual delivery begins. This will obviously take a little moment. And if I now dive back into my details, I can see that the first two documents have already been delivered. Michael Gelling has received his, and the sample family has also got their utility bill. And I can see it quite clearly here. The tracking ID is immediately recorded here, and this is for me, as the sender. The proof, just a moment, the document has reached the recipient. As soon as that's gone through, it will be grayed out. You can see this quite well with the older orders here. That's going to take a little moment until everything has finally been processed. And I'd like to use that time to go over some other information that the Output Manager can provide. For example, I can upload business documents. I can define the attachments here, where I can say, should it perhaps only be the digital recipients who get it, or should the postal recipients also receive it? On top of that, I can always create a new print job if I've already generated a PDF file today. For example, I can create a new print job through transaction mail. On top of that, I can also set up a document that many people should receive via the digital mail merge. You can already see that I need to adjust a bit more. Who is the document meant for? And similar things. But I wouldn't want to go into that any deeper at this moment, because I think that would then lead us too far off track. For the first overview, I'm going back to the print jobs now, and I can see that the document has now been fully delivered. With the 6,149, I'm going to check the details again, and here I can also see the apartment 5. That's the name here. It has also been delivered, again with a so-called tracking ID that I received. And the nice thing for me now is that I've set it up digitally and by post. That which still needs to go out by post is now automatically going to the printing line. I don't need to do anything else. I'm done with the approval of the order, with my work, and with that, I can then turn my attention back to the other topics that are still on my desk, that I can find there straight away. I'm going back now, logging off as the caseworker who sends out the documents. And I'm now switching to the recipient's view. I've already sort of left that for you. It's really important that as soon as I activate the mailbox as the recipient, it's my mailbox, it becomes my property. And as the deliverer, I no longer have access to it. I manage this myself as well. We'll see that again shortly. I'm now logging in with my access details. And I can already see there that I have a folder structure on the left side, where I can store documents, individual, and I can also see an inbox folder. This inbox folder now contains, for example, my contract documents that I've received and my utility bill. I just click on it and see my utility bill for 2023. I could click on it now and then see my corresponding statement that I've received. which I can of course check now. It's really important for me that in my mailbox, I have the option to print the documents because I might need them digitally or maybe in paper form to pass them on somewhere. Because I might need them digitally or maybe in paper form to pass it on somewhere. You never know, do you? But I have this option at any time, of course. It's really important. I can log into my account. But of course, I was also notified by email that I have received a new document. If I use the apps, I'll also be notified via push notification that a new document has arrived. And on top of that, I also have a little black one up here in the message console. If I click on it here, I can see that I've received a new document, and I can also jump directly to the document from here, which gives me the same view again, where I then, of course, have the same overview again, just like now when I go through this folder structure. It's definitely helpful when I receive several documents, maybe even from multiple senders. Maybe my employer sends something, maybe my insurance, and maybe my insured documents. Then I have exactly 3 senders in my mailbox in the inbox. And that's really nice, of course, when I can manage things through the messages, who sent me something, to be able to access my documents. Since it's my account, I obviously have full control over it. You can see that quite clearly here. Can I change my username, password, and email address at any time, if I want to? I don't have to do it, but I can do it, especially if my email address or something similar changes. Very important, I can set up two-factor authentication. I can set up the notification. Basically, everything I need to manage my digital mailbox properly. That should be it at first glance. With the digital or the d.velop mailbox, I'm just going to log out right now, and we'll come back to the presentation. We've just seen the software live, but it's also really important here when it comes to the topic of security. And it's like this. It's a German cloud service, d.velop AG. Very important, the data is stored exclusively in Germany. To this end, we work with the data center operator Cancom. The data center is set up to be geo-redundant. It actually just means that we have two rake to guarantee availability, of course. Additionally, the data center has an ISO 27001 certification to further ensure the protection of highly sensitive data. Moreover, every document is fundamentally encrypted. In addition, the data center has an ISO 27001 certification to further ensure the protection of highly sensitive data. Moreover, every document is fundamentally encrypted. Very important, as a recipient, I always access it through the encrypted connection and, once again, what increases security? It's of course the two-factor authentication that I can enable individually, especially when I receive a lot of sensitive documents. Now I'd like to talk about the Velo mailbox again. Come on. So, what are the advantages of digital mail delivery? So that you can visualize it again. What do I actually get out of it? What happens when I switch to digital? Clearly, of course, I've saved costs. You can see it quite nicely here with the individual steps from the front of the slides. You can actually see it all the way through. I always have points that drop off there, which naturally contribute to cost savings. I think the last point here is really important, the manual workload, because this is often or very often underestimated. What kind of effort is actually involved when letters, papers, still really printing, sending. There are returns and it can't be processed. And there's always a high manual workload behind it. A second, very important point is, of course, time savings. It actually falls with the last position of the first advantage with RAIN. I've got loads of time for other tasks and projects that are on the rise in efficiency that I can concentrate on, especially when I don't have to print it anymore. You can also think about bulk data dispatch, where I obviously have a significant saving compared to the analog process. Thinking about where I then obviously have a significant saving compared to the analog process. We just briefly touched on the topic of security. Absolutely, a GDPR-compliant delivery process. I've got the proof of delivery in the form of the tracking ID that I received. I have a German data center with ISO 27001, which is also very, very important, especially when it comes to highly sensitive data that are being sent today. The topic of sustainability, I think, affects us all, is of course another point for digital delivery. It's clear, I'm reducing paper and water consumption because the paper doesn't need to be produced. I don't have to print it, and ultimately, once it's scanned, it might end up being recycled anyway. You can obviously save that when you send it digitally straight away. Postal delivery, you've seen it for yourself. Deutsche Post has cancelled its night flights for postal delivery. And that's how it is, of course. The trips will remain, there's really no other way. But you can definitely save a lot there as well. And a very important point, quick accessibility to all recipients. If I want to send ad hoc messages now, I can reach them immediately through digital means. If I have an analog process where the letter still needs to be delivered, it simply takes 1, 2, 3 days, depending on where I am and how often deliveries are made, that I can't deliver it straight away either. Another important point, the fifth one, is avoiding media breaks. Especially point 1, which is about the difficult collaboration and communication among employees, really highlights how it's tailored to the HR processes. I can't reach the employees, I can't inform them quickly, but also, of course, potential security gaps that I have. With many media, something can always go wrong. That's always really, really difficult to intervene in everything. And of course, the risk of information distortion is another point. That keeps coming up time and again, where you keep reading up on things that something can happen. And in the digital realm, with encryption, it's obviously much more restricted. And the last point I want to touch on here is once again the topic of accessibility. It's really important that with the digital process, I have a straightforward way to involve all participants. Can access my web, but I also have the option to use the apps. For example, on the tablet, I can also download it onto my smartphone so that I can view the documents at any time. It's really helpful, especially when I rely on important documents that then needs to be delivered. I can inform quickly and then, of course, I have the certainty. Okay, my counterpart will be actively notified. Can he access them? No matter where he is right now. Also, access these documents. That should be it from my side for now. It should have been an overview. And now, of course, we have one last point. As I just mentioned, frequently asked questions, and would like to touch on that again now. Thank you this point.
And I want to say a big thank you to you, Michael, for this introduction and your explanations. And of course the live part, so hopefully they were able to get a good insight into what we mean when we talk about digital mail delivery. You just said it, Michael, that we're not just focusing on the direct, immediate, and simple accessibility of all recipients. And we hope that we've managed to do just that with the webinar up to this point, so you know exactly what you're getting into if you might be interested. Many people are already interested in digitizing their mail delivery, and that's why we have a whole load of questions that keep getting asked. And perhaps your questions are already included. If not, you're still warmly invited to the webinar room to simply ask your question in the chat window. And you'll get then, as mentioned earlier, not just the slides and the video recording, but of course also a written response to your question, completely individually afterwards from us. But let's get started with what we keep hearing. Above all, it's always questions about the implementation and introduction, especially regarding the efforts required from the internal IT in their company or organization. Can you say something about that, Michael? How much time does the IT need to plan for?
A common question is how much to involve internal IT, as IT is often the bottleneck for many projects, especially upcoming IT-related ones, that it gets integrated. Because, of course, IT is often the bottleneck with many projects, especially those related to IT that are on the horizon. And that's obviously important, that I can start as quickly as possible, or as soon as possible. And we've created a solution with the virtual printer, TT. It can be implemented by IT very quickly. If everything goes smoothly, then you'll be done in about an hour. I can use the printer. It's in my software that generates the document output. Integrated, I can initiate the print job. And with that, IT is no longer involved in the project and can focus on other issues. And then, of course, I can also take the opportunity to implement other projects there.
Perfect. And how does the printer work? You even just showed that live. And when you look at the overall project, how long does it take to implement this digitalization solution?
I can certainly elaborate on that. It's always a bit tricky to mention specific figures because, of course, every project is a bit different. It always depends on what I actually want to deliver digitally in the future. If we speak of such a classic, when we talk about digitalization in the HR sector, for example, payroll, then I can roughly estimate 2 to 3 months. That's also because, of course, with payroll, I always have a fixed date and a regularity regarding when the delivery takes place. Have a fixed date and a regularity when the delivery takes place. But if we're talking about other documents, if I want to send insurance or utility bills, then that can be done in 2 months because I don't have any strict deadlines. Then, of course, it can be successfully completed in 2 months because I don't have any fixed deadlines to stick to. So, you can't always say it individually. But you can certainly say that we need a certain amount of time. We also have a project timeline, of course. That's obviously very important as well. Of course, it will also be tested. And ultimately, in a short time, you'll be able to test the software. You can think about it. How would you like to organize the rollout? And then we'll support you until you've successfully delivered digitally on your own for the first few times.
You just gave a good keyword, namely this project implementation plan. That's also one of the very frequently asked questions. What does the entire process look like? If someone says, I'd like to use it for my organization, then those people will first get in touch. For my organization, I'd like to use that. Then, those people will first get in touch. What happens then, until you finally go live?
Exactly. Once you've made contact, then there's another individual presentation of the solution, where you can also do one-on-one. There, direct questions, the challenges that might come up, can clarify, can discuss. And should that be suitable then? And if the solution is still being considered, then it actually moves a step further. Then, of course, after the commissioning, it goes to the consultants. It then continues from there. There's a kickoff meeting where everyone discusses things together. What should be sent, for example? How should it be sent? How do I want to present myself as the sender? What are my typical recipients? That's always the milestone. 1. That we create the basic framework. Milestone 2. That's when we really get into the nitty-gritty of the coordination. That's where it comes in, you see. That's why we, for example, will run the first test so we can onboard the first test group. In addition, we also have the opportunity to do a second round of testing. For example, if that has been successfully completed, we can leave milestone 2 and move on to milestone 3. Milestone 3 then involves, of course, how do I best engage my digital recipients in the future? And milestone 4 is then just the joint live launch. They'll definitely get support from us, especially when working with new software. Then it's obviously nice. If I haven't used it that often yet, then of course I want to feel comfortable with it. There's a contact person available, so if I have any questions, I can quickly and easily ask them.
That doesn't sound complicated, Michael.
It isn't either.
Very nice. Then let's move on a bit further. I have one more question, and it's another frequently asked one. What about when there's already other software in the company? Are there integration options for the developer mailbox?
Exactly. That's a common situation we encounter. There is already software in the company today that produces document output. And it's obviously important to create a simple interface. We did that with the virtual printer, so that we can naturally integrate PDF documents. But of course, we also have the option to integrate Word and Excel. So, as we saw today in the live part, But also, of course, the HR solutions that generate document output, ERP systems, or similar. There are loads and loads of documents. With the virtual printer, we've created the opportunity that we take the data. Take from the leading applications, transmit, process in the output manager, where you can then release them. That's the big advantage. With the virtual printer, you get a tool that doesn't just work with one system. It's established that you can connect many different systems in parallel, and you can also work with individual permissions there, so that all sorts of different departments can send these documents.
You mentioned earlier, Michael, that there are of course different types of documents that can be delivered. When it comes to salary matters, for example, those are already more confidential pieces of information. Is there anything else you can say about these certificates and legal conditions that you've already mentioned in case someone has concerns about data protection?
Exactly, data protection is always a topic, just like the EU GDPR, which is somewhat related to that. Here, it's always important. You first have to take a look. What kind of documents do I want to send? There are certain documents that still have to be sent by post, in paper form. Why? Because the legislator requires it. For example, an employment reference comes to mind. I have to issue that in original form. I have no choice but to print it out, sign it, and send it accordingly. I can't get anywhere with the digital side of things. Otherwise, it's the case that, especially where highly sensitive data is being processed, it's of course important for me to take a close look at the legal points. For example, it can come from the Works Council or the Staff Council, a co-determination has, who naturally wants to have a say when it comes to these sensitive data, but it can also go further. For example, with health insurance companies, it's often the case that audits and external checks take place. How do we handle the data? How is data protection? And you always have to keep checking. How sensitive is the data that I want to send over? It's really important that we're already sending highly sensitive data with the solution today. That's been checked, but it always needs to be considered on an individual basis. What do I need to do then? Which parts of the company do I maybe need to involve to then implement such a solution? That's always important, of course. Of course, we also support that based on the experience from the projects we've implemented. And that's usually a really good combination. So we can solve it together. The questions that are there and that are answered very satisfactorily.
And we also use our own software, so just the digital salary delivery alone. I believe, for more than a decade now, Michael, we've been digitally set up at d.velop, so to speak, as test subjects. And by now, we've implemented this digital salary delivery for an incredible number of clients, which also requires a legal basis. I always find it exciting when I throw you any questions. How eloquently can you answer those, almost like you've shot them out of a gun? You can carry on in writing straight away. Namely afterwards. There are still some questions that have been asked. And, as participants in this webinar, you certainly have the right to get those answered. So, just hang on a moment. Afterwards, you will receive an email with the recording and the slides. And of course, with answers to your individual questions that might still be open. I want to say a huge thank you for being here, that you took the time to get a bit more informed around the topic of digital mail delivery. Thank you very much, Michael Gelling, from the pre-sales team and an expert in this field. How could it proceed for you now? When you say, I find that interesting, then there are two possibilities. Either you can respond informally to the email we'll send you afterwards, or if you want it to be even quicker, take out your phone and simply click, or rather, just scan the QR code displayed here. Then you have the option to, basically at the push of a button, to arrange a free software demo about the mailbox and really see it live. What this could look like for your employees in your company or organization. And afterwards, in their PDF slide collection, which you will also receive from us. Then you can even click on the yellow button and book your free demo accordingly. We would be very pleased to have a more concrete and, of course, personal exchange with you. Thank you once again for your time. Thank you very much for the introduction to Michael Gelling. And, of course, we hope that you will join us again at one of the next d.velop webinars. Until then, all the best, thank you very much, and goodbye.